Hi, it's Amber. I thought I would do a video today showing you the process, or at least a portion of the process, that I go through in making the sourdough bread. So we have a farm stand that I just opened, and in that farm stand I offer the artisan sourdough bread for sale. And I thought it would be kind of neat if people who buy the bread and eat the bread would be able to look at a video and see the process that I go through to make that bread. Just a portion of the process. It actually, making a loaf of artisan sourdough bread takes 2 days at the least. It takes 3 days if you count the process of making the levain the night before you begin mixing the dough. But before I get into all of that, I kind of want to talk about that whole process. Making sourdough bread is a skill. It is both science and it is an art. That is why it's often called artisan sourdough bread. It's a learning process, and anytime you learn any kind of a new skill, there is a huge learning curve. It's at times very exciting, and at other times very disappointing, because you will be experiencing failure. Particularly in the beginning stage of learning, you will be riddled with failure. I know myself, it took me a whole month just to get a starter that I could use for baking. I couldn't even begin to try to bake bread until I had a starter that was ready to bake with. And that can take, 3 to 4 weeks to get that going. And then there's the process of learning to make the bread. Sourdough bread is not like yeast bread that you have a recipe and you mix it up and you bake it and it comes out great. It's a whole different thing. People ask for my recipe sometimes, and it's very simple. You can go online. It is called the Tartine Country Loaf. And you can find that in multiple places if you do a Google search. There's nothing incredibly unique about it, I don't think. It's kind of a basic sourdough bread recipe. But the recipe is just a very, very small part of making sourdough bread. There is the whole skill that it takes, and it takes a long time to learn to do that. I made bad bread. I made bread in the beginning that didn't even make it to the oven. I just threw it directly into the trash can. And I know people will probably chide me for throwing away food, but what I made was barely called food. It was pretty bad. And my time is also valuable. In fact, my time is more valuable than flour. So I didn't want to waste my time either. So I threw some loaves away in the beginning because they were just really not fit to be even baked. Then once I got past that stage, I finally made bread that was okay. You might even call it bad bread. It wasn't fantastic. It was okay. And then I started making bread that was decent. It was edible. It tasted good. It didn't look good at all. It was not pretty. Not by any stretch of the imagination was it pretty, but it was edible. It tasted good. And unfortunately, some of my poor neighbors got some of those loaves because I was practicing. I was baking 2 or 3 times a week, and there's no way that I could eat all that myself. My husband is gluten-free, so he can't eat it. And so I shared it because it wasn't sellable. It didn't look very good, but it tasted okay. And I would not be offended if my neighbors tossed it in the garbage either. So once I got past that stage, then I finally got to the point where I was making good bread. It turned out really beautiful. It had that nice ear and belly to it. I had good oven spring, and it looked fantastic. And so I started selling. But that whole process from making the starter to making a pretty good loaf of sourdough bread took me from Easter to almost the 4th of July. It is now June 29th. So it's just been in the last week or two that I have gotten to the point where I feel like, okay, I have a product now that I can feel good about selling. So It's a long process. It is an exercise in patience. Everything you have to be patient with. Even after you get to the point where you can make a good loaf of bread, once that bread comes out of the oven, guess what? Even if it looks perfect, it may not be. You won't know until you slice into it and find out what the crumb looks like, that you will know if it was a success or a failure. And then, even if it's perfect, cutting into that bread too soon will ruin it, a perfectly good loaf. So a lot of people don't know that, but you bring that bread right out of the oven and it smells amazing, and you want to cut and eat a loaf or a slice of warm homemade bread right out of the oven. Well, you can't do that with sourdough, because cutting into it before it is completely cooled will make it be gummy. So you have to wait. Even after you've gone through all that process, you still have to wait. Every time you make a loaf of bread, you have to wait about 4 hours or so before you can slice into it and see what it tastes like. So it is an exercise in patience, to be sure. But anytime you learn any kind of a new skill, you've got to have patience with yourself, because you will fail, and that's okay. Failure is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't know when we got off making failure a bad thing. It's a good thing. It means you're on the path to learning something new. So my advice is hang in there, keep at it. You will get there. I promise you will get there if you don't quit.